But Airlines W.A in 1945, at the end of the war, had 4 aircraft. And they were, there we are, a Stinson Reliant, a Dragonfly, which is, I always reckon, is the younger brother of the DH104 Dragon, and a couple of DH89 Rapides, which I call the big brother of the Dragon. But now a bit of history of Airlines W.A.'s in the late 40s, 50s. But on the 25th of September 1945, the prototype Dove made its maiden flight. In 1947-48, 8 surplus Avro Ansons were obtained from war disposals. But then again, Airlines bought their first Dove, and it was assembled on the 21st, or the final assembly was the 21st of April 1947. And there it is. But you notice its call sign was Alpha Quebec Papa. In those days it would have been Able Queenie, something for P, I don't know what. But that all changed in later years. But unfortunately, on the 7th of May, the day before it was due to do its first scheduled flight, it did a wheels-up landing at Maylands Airport. And the pilot was Brian Blackjack Walker. So that was the day before, day before the first scheduled airline flight, which had to be delayed. Sid Goddard was sitting in the co-pilot seat, or God Siddard, as he's called. So de Havilland's had their demonstrator Dove, Alpha Quebec Oscar, and it was the second production aircraft, and that was swapped for their damaged one, and there's a photograph of it. And this is mainly the story about this aircraft in later time. Now this Dove was the second production aircraft, and it had a constructor number 0402, which comes from the Dove was the DH104, so that's where the 04 comes from, and 02 was the second one off the production line. Now in those days, Airlines did a great thing by having a christening ceremony. And there it is, they're putting the champagne, pouring it over the nose of the aircraft in the hangar. You notice they don't smash a bottle of champagne against the aircraft. In 1949, that was their third Dove that came. It was actually the second one in the fleet because the first one was crashed. And that also appears in our story. And then later in the 53, they bought several second-hand ones, and they had a fleet of 5. And that's 4 of them outside the hangar at Guildford. Now we come to the day of the crash. And Alpha Quebec Oscar was completed a morning flight to Kalgoorlie and return. And there were 5 snags which were attended to by the ground engineers. And the crew for the afternoon flight the captain was Charles Hood. The guy with the circle around his head is the captain of the aircraft, and the hostess cum radio operator was Dorothy Riley. And there were 5 scheduled passengers for the trip, and the aircraft was due to take off at 1 p.m. When they started the engines, there was no oil pressure in the left-hand engine. So the engineers changed the pressure transducer, they started up the engine, all was okay, and it took off at 1:29 p.m. It reported to flight service at Cunderdin, Merredin and Southern Cross, and you can see the route, and at Barabin it reported to Kalgoorlie Air Radio, which was the forerunner of flight service, that it was about to commence descent and estimated arrival time at 3:26 p.m. At 3:18, the aircraft advised it would be landing in 7 minutes. And 3 minutes later, or 2 minutes later, Kalgoorlie Air Radio tried to contact the Dove to advise the landing conditions. There was no reply from the Dove, so Kalgoorlie and Perth Air Radio called up, or tried calling up, and again no answer. At 3:25, when the aircraft was due to arrive, there was no Dove. So 4 minutes later, emergency procedures were put into existence. At about 9 p.m. that night, the ground party located the wreckage. It was approximately 12 miles west of Kalgoorlie and almost on the direct Perth-Kalgoorlie track, and there were no survivors. Now we come to the accident investigation. The debris was found to be scattered over about 100 yards, with the port wing a further 500, and it was virtually in one piece. And there's, as you can see, the wing, almost complete. A further 300 metres further west were the radio compass loop and part of the cockpit canopy. The Dove had obviously suffered a major structural damage. Now at that stage, Alpha Quebec Oscar, the one that had crashed, had flown about 9,000 hours. Alpha Zulu Yankee had about 8,500 hours. And Alpha Quebec Papa, which the original aircraft, which had been gutsed on the field at Maylands, had 4,500 hours. No other Doves in the world had done more than 3,000 hours at that time. So Airlines W.A had good utilisation of their Dove aircraft. Now the investigators found that the portside lower spar boom had sustained a fatigue failure just inboard of the wing root. It's not a very clear picture, but you can see the two circled areas indicate the cockpit roof. That area is the wing root, and that is the cockpit. And for those that can't read drawings, they're the two circled bits we're talking about. Well, one of the other things I might say about the Dove, that little rhino horn, I reckon, is one of the best features of the Dove, but it knocked about 2 to 3 knots off the cruise speed. So in later Doves, when they had changed the radio compass system, that was chopped off. Now the investigators, in the reconstruction of events, concluded that the failure had occurred on descent just after the last radio call. And remember that moderate to severe turbulence was forecast below 5,000 feet. And it was estimated to have descended to approximately 2,500 feet when the lower spar boom finally let go, allowing the wing to pivot up and hit the side of the fuselage. In pivoting up, it broke the upper spar boom and the rear spar. Now, in hitting the fuselage side, it tore away the remaining attachments, which would have been things like fuel pipes, control cables, compressed air pipe for the brakes. And the wing struck the top of the fuselage, knocking the radio compass loop off and smashing the cockpit roof. As a result of this crash, all Doves around the world were grounded. However, Alpha Zulu Yankee carried out the morning flight to Kalgoorlie the next day, where it was immediately grounded on arrival. On inspection later on that afternoon by the chief engineer, he discovered a 1 1/4 inch crack in the starboard side lower spar boom. So another accident was nearly about to happen with that aircraft. And of course it had to be trucked back to Perth, and you can see a photograph there, and that was the headlines in the paper advertising the fact, or advising of the fact. Now I want to talk a little bit about what I called it is All Fliers Group Engineering Metallurgy 101. And I hope this doesn't bore you too much. But metal fatigue in metal, or fatigue in metal, refers to the failure of a member under repeated alternating stress. And the stress required to cause failure this way is much less than it required by a single tensile pull. Now, in a laboratory, they have this thing called a Fliers machine. And that consists of a chuck driven by electric motor, the test piece, the ball race fitting on the end, and a loading system to increase or decrease the stresses in the test piece, and something to count the number of revolutions. And what you do is you test many specimens of the same specification at different loads, and this is done until failure occurs or you go through 20 million cycles. And you get a curve like that. Up there, that's stress at failure, and that is the number of reversals, and that they take up to about 20 million cycles. And all that really shows is that the more cycles you do, the less stress it takes to fail. But in doing this, when you have a failure, fatigue failures have a definite pattern. When you put a piece of metal in the Fliers machine, and I've got, this simulates the Fliers machine. Right. When it goes through one cycle, and in this case it spreads apart when it's cracked. When it turns around, the pieces come together and they're rubbing at each cycle. So that gives a pattern on that side with those dotted lines, or that are the striations that shows it rubs and then polishes itself when it comes together again, until finally this bit here is the final tear, and it's a crystalline fracture. Now that is pretty typical of a fatigue failure. Now what I want to do is demonstrate a fatigue failure, and I've got another sample over here. If I get this bit in a little vise and wiggle it up and down, it breaks. And that is fatigue. Now all this theory is to show you what the real spar looked like. And what they do is cut a sample of that spar where it failed, and you polish it on finer and finer emery cloth, and then you etch it for about 10 to 20 seconds in something like a Keller's reagent. And Keller's reagent consists of 1% hydrofluoric acid, 1.5% hydrochloric acid, 2.5% nitric acid, and 95% water, with a great warning: do not get it anywhere near your eyes, and don't breathe in the fumes, and don't spill it on your clothes. Now this slide shows the striations all numbered there, and you can see they're like, that's where it's cracked and rubbed together and polished, and some down here too. And then finally, when it's broken, you can see that coarser failure there, being a tensile failure, and it can't bear the load, and so it lets go. So that's what happened to the Dove. We're now looking at the metallurgical examination and repair scheme, and as a result, years during the war, there was a Stinson tri-motor which had been converted to a two-engine aircraft, and it suffered fatigue near Mildura on the 31st of January 1945, And the Aeronautical Research Laboratory was asked to investigate further the problems of metal fatigue in aircraft, and they were given 200 Mustang wings, which they tested to destruction, and gained a lot of knowledge about metal fatigue in aircraft, which made Australia a leader in the field. Now, after the Dove crash, the ARL in Victoria was asked to determine if such a failure could be predicted, and a Dr. F.H. Hook estimated the fatigue life of a Dove spar was between 3,000 and 12,800 hours, with a probable life of 10,800 hours. And remember, Alpha Quebec Oscar had done about 9,000, Alpha Zulu Yankee had done 8,500, and one failed, the first one failed, and the second one was on the way to failure. And Alpha Quebec Papa had done 4,500 hours, and no crack was actually discovered. But Dr. Hook's calculation showed that replacing 75ST alloy, now 7075, with 24ST, now 2024, the fatigue life could be increased 3 to 5 times. And de Havilland replaced the spar with material made of L72, which is the equivalent, English equivalent of 2024. Now, if you have a Dove, the Australian Airworthiness Directive has a spar life of 17,500 hours for a Mark 1 to 5 Dove, and 14,000 hours for a Mark 6 to 8 Dove. And the reason for the difference here is a different takeoff weight for the different marks and increased engine power. That just shows you the analysis of 7075 and 2024, and these just shows you the concentrate or amount of zinc around about 6%, and increases the ultimate tensile strength. And this one, 2024, which is they're using now for the spar, is a much lower figure. That is for a T0, which is a soft material. It's hadn't been tempered. And to quote John Watkins, who was the technical director of TAA years ago, about the Vickers Viscount, a contemporary aircraft of the Dove, he said, "The Viscount was made of zinc-bearing light alloys, which turned out to be rather prone to stress corrosion for one thing, and also to have a rather poor fatigue life under repeated stresses." And the prototype Dove first flew in 1948 and was introduced to Australia by TAA in 1954. So you can see it's around about the same time as the Doves were made. Anyhow, by mid-December 1951, de Havilland supplied new spars made of L72, and Alpha Zulu Yankee was test flown on the 31st of December 1951, and Alpha Quebec Papa on the 18th of January 1952. And Airlines acquired several second-hand Doves in about 1933 to bring their total up to about 5. Now, due to a change in policy of the federal government regarding the subsidies paid to airlines, Airlines W.A amalgamated with McRobinson Miller Aviation in 1955 in October, and the new company was called McRobinson Miller Airlines. And the new fleet consisted of 5 DC-3s, 5 Doves, and 5 Avro Ansons. Now, in 1951, I was a pupil at Netherlands Primary School in second standard, and a girl in our class did not attend school for the rest of that week after the crash of the Dove, because her father was a passenger, and her mother came to the school the next year at the start of the 1952 year as a primary school teacher. Thank you very much.